Hello and welcome. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. This is episode number 5 in the current series of
Today is a funny night.
In our last program, we detailed a number of activities associated with the riots, those activities that occurred here in Bridgetown and throughout the island. You would recall that by this time, the people have assembled and the riot act has been read.
Because what had happened by then is that policemen, a squadron of Barbadian policemen, numbering probably about 100, had been armed from the arsenal there at Central, and they came up Broad Street, that is coming in an easterly direction, starting from the point of the Mutual Building and following the path of the rioters, because they dispersed the rioters. And these are actual legal terms. Disperse this mob, right? A mob is an unruly grouping of people engaged in riotous and illegal activity. Disperse, which means you must leave the place immediately on pain of police firing at you or arresting you. So the order was given by Corporal Grant, and he said, disperse this mob, right? This group of unruly people. And by the powers vested in us, namely the Riotous Assembly Act, by the Riot Act, you are hereby ordered to leave the streets and go to your homes. Do not be seen on the streets. Otherwise, the police will shoot at you, and we will not be liable for any grievous bodily harm or a death to any persons. Captain Grant, as he was later, I wouldn't say he seemed to enjoy that, but that was his moment in time. That was his moment of absolute authority.
For this program, we make very good use of a rich source, that is the archival material preserved by the Archives Department of the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation.
Policemen then had power to do then anything. Well, they lick some and some get shoot, and I happened to be coming around below a horse and not getting souls and see policemen shoot a man, and his belly was coming out. And 2 women had him hold and taking their hands so and pushing back in the belly. And I was coming through Harrison Alley, and the spirit tell me don't go through there. If I'd come through there, I would have had it. But I come wrong below Harrison. And when I got there, I saw this man then, with the belly out, and people trying to push it in and so on. And it was a terrible, terrible time.
Over the years, several articles and papers were written about this event, which occurred here in Bridgetown and throughout the island. I'm quite certain that you would recall the many lectures and discussions on the topics. Now, throughout all of these, the information presented concurred with her account. Historian Trevor Marshall continues his description of the captain.
In retelling the story, he seemed to revel in the fact that he had power, not just authority, but power at that time over fellow citizens to make them hearken to the instructions of the police and to get off the streets.
Meanwhile, the people are disturbed and enraged by this action. What is happening now throughout Bridgetown? How are the people responding to these shootings?
The rioters were stopping cars, stopping buses, and commandeering buses. Many buses were commandeered by rioters. And one bus driver, a man by the name of Mr. Johnson, driving a General Motors bus, he felt the onslaught of the rioters. They stopped his bus. A rioter got in and told him to drive. Of course, the rioter had a cold chisel to Johnson's neck, so Johnson had no hesitation in driving the rioters to wherever they wanted to go. And that bus ended up in Huddersfield Turning, where the rioters got out of the bus and proceeded to loot a shop in Huddersfield Thurden, and then they drove off with the bus. So we have evidence, therefore, of buses being stopped. We also have evidence of cars being stopped and homes along Fontabelle being attacked, people being attacked as well. So when you look at the riots, therefore, we have a very serious affair on Tuesday, the 27th of July. But what about Wednesday? The next day, riots again in Broad Street. Rioters come out again and they participate for about 2 hours before they were chased off by the police. So we have in July 3 days of rioting in the city. We had the night of July 26th, the morning of July 27th, and then the morning of July 28th, riots in the city.
Now, Bridgetown was the epicenter of the 1937 riots. However, the tentacles of that extended throughout the island. Yes, there were activities associated with the riots occurring elsewhere.
Now let us move to the countryside, where the riot or the revolt went on until the 31st of July and beyond. 31st of July and beyond. The final mopping up of the revolt was done August 3rd. So this was not only a 2-day affair, but into August 3rd, the volunteers and the police were still doing mopping up operations. Now let us look at the pattern of attack in the country. Basically, 2 areas were attacked. 2 areas. Shops were attacked and plantations were attacked.
And then it is important actually to look at that because I think that is, you know, that is a little bit complicated. Why the shops? Because as you know, the shops are a major resource in all urban as well as rural, but even more rural. But think about it. In a situation in which, in fact, it probably even still persists to some extent today, in a situation in which there are low wages, well, what you really depend upon when you're at the bottom of the social and economic pole, what you depend upon is credit. You know, and that's the importance of the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper obviously produces, you know, provides your basic staples. But in order for that to be sustained, there must be credit.
Most of those shops were owned by provision merchants, such as RDN Maxwell and James A. Tudor. These were leading provision merchants during that period. As a matter of fact, Tudor owned 28 shops in 1937, leading provision merchant, and his shops were attacked. He had shops in Ellerton, he had shops in St. Philip, and they were attacked and looted.
A number of the people involved in the action recognized that this was an opportunity, in a sense, to clean the slate. To clean the slate. In fact, I would make the point more general. Whenever you look at these disturbances across the region before the 1930s, you will find that shopkeepers were a target. One might make the elementary point that they're a target because they have what you want, you know, foodstuffs, and they might have some money. But I would think that there's more to it than that. This is an opportunity to wipe the slate clean. And you might add too, if in fact there is any sense that these people have been gouging you, this is the payback time.
The rioters took away sugar, they took away pork, they took away all sorts of provisions. And it is said that one man was seen with a bag over his shoulder. And he was so bold to exclaim that I have the rice, I coming back for the pork. We don't know if he actually got back for the pork, but you could understand that those shops were attacked. Then we have another shop owned by B.L. Barrow in Messiah Street, St. John. And we are told, when we look at the evidence, the court proceedings, one man was seen outside the shop with a knife in his hand, and he sits down outside the shop with a knife, and he says, "This is for B.L. Barrow's goods tonight."
This is Messiah Street in St. John. B.L. Barrow resided here at this house, so the events associated with the riots are occurring here in this area. Now, not very far away from here is Venture in St. John.
My father's shop was in Venture, St. John, and I lived in Venture, St. John too. And at that time, my mother had a shop in Martins Bay, St. John. Okay, so my father was in Venture, my mother was in Martins Bay, but I used to spend time with my grandmother in Venture.
Now, exactly what was a little Sylvia witnessing at that time? And you might even wonder about how the news traveled to the countryside. Remember, this is rural Barbados, Venture, in fact. Not town. It's 1937. CBC is not in existence. Our newspapers are not published daily, and the first wired broadcasting service had commenced just a few years earlier.
During the time of the riots, I was with my grandmother in Venture, and I had a very good friend called Violet, and she lived with her godfather, and I used to spend a lot of time at her home too. And I remember the day of the riots. Policemen came up on motorcycles in Venture, where we lived. And I was by my friend's home. And when the police fired off some shots, and we went under the bed, and we hid under the bed, Violet and I. We hid under the bed. Well, I don't remember a lot of what went after that, but I know that I heard some people saying, "We're going up the road, but we're not going to interfere with Beresford Gill." That was my father in the shop in Venture. So they said, "We are not going to interfere with Beresford Gill."
Now, that's an interesting tale. The question needs to be asked, why would the rioters make such bold declaration? You'll find out that it was all because of the generosity and the kind and good nature of her parents, two community-spirited individuals who understood the plight of the underprivileged and extended a helping hand.
Because I can remember my mother, even most at the shop in Venture. I like my belly. I love my food. And I would see my mother would take her food and give it to people who came to the shop. One day I said, "But Mother, how can you take your food so and give people?" She said, "I have something that I can go and cook, but those people do not have anything to cook." Okay? And that is how she was, that is how my father was too, and that's how they lived. Okay, so that is why the people in Venture said they were not going to interfere with Beresford Gill because he was a good man.
Interestingly enough, this is not what those who were living on one of our coastal districts in this parish of St. John experienced on that day. These are the voices, the other voices of the riots.
But my mother now, she was in a shop in Martins Bay. And my two sisters, my older sister Melanese and my younger sister Marjorie, they were in Martins Bay with my mother. And I think it was Melanese because she was the sickly one. She was not well. But my mother was a very brave woman. And she used to sew our own clothes. And remember she said she had a machine on the counter because she was in a shop too. And she was making some clothes for my younger sister Marjorie, who was a few years old at that time. But she said when the people came the night and they broke the shop doors and they came in. And she said she was from one bedroom to the next calling out for help. And one tell her, she said the man tell her, shut her still mouth in there before he do this and that with her. But my mother, she said the moonlight was very, very bright. And she could remember these people by what they wore during the day. Well, she had a neighbor, and the neighbor had tried to get over to at least take my little sister from her, but she couldn't get out. But my mother, the brave woman that she was, she said she went from window to door and shouting, murder, help, help. The police did come, but she went there, broke out. But she said she could remember and she could tell the police by name who the people were that came in. She said she had a machine tool on the counter because she used to sew our clothes and things. And they took the machine tool, okay? But she could identify every one of them because the moonlight was very bright and she knew them by name.
An interesting account of what occurred at two shops in the same parish. One saved, the other one looted.
So that we have evidence, therefore, of shops being attacked and that the rioters are rioting under a leader. Most of these rioters are led by a leader who issue instructions as to what to do. Okay? So in the countryside, we have leaders attacking these shops. Now, there's a school of thought that the rioters were hungry or faced the possibility of hunger. Now, it is true that rioters were hungry. It is true that bread and provisions could not leave Bridgetown to get to the country. And that is a reason why they might have attacked shops. But there's another possibility, that these provision merchants, it is felt, were in league with the commission merchants, the planters and the merchants in Bridgetown. And they were responsible for the high prices charged in the system, so that the provision merchants were constrained to charge prices that were set by the commission merchants. So you could understand, therefore, why the rioters would be upset with the provision merchants as well, even though many of them were black provision merchants. So the rioters attacked the shops, they looted the shops. One shop in particular in Hillaby was burnt to the ground, and most of the rioters who testified, they told the court that they did not intend to burn the shop, but that a lantern was displaced from its position. That lantern caught fire and the shop was accidentally burned. That was the shop in Hillaby in St. Andrew. But let us turn our attention now to the plantations. Many of the planters grew provisions such as yams and potatoes. And this is July. A lot of yams were planted, a lot of potatoes were planted, and several plantations felt the weight of the rioters. For example, you have Bath Plantation. It is said that hundreds of rioters descended at Bath and literally cleaned out the potato field at Bath. 3,000 holes of potatoes were looted at Bath Plantation.
In our archives, we came across a lady who had such an experience. At the time of her interview, she did not wish her identity to be revealed. Although she has passed on, we will continue to respect her wish.
I had a few bits of potato slips in my hand for goat, so I was standing up in this position, so I haven't heard no car come up. Once I there, I just saw this car appear, you know, and it stopped. And I looking at the gentleman, he looking at me. And he had his hands rest on the car like that. He let go 2 shots. I haven't feel nothing hit me. 2 shots he let go. And then switch up the engine and went along. I didn't decide to move at the same time. Then when he said, I feel my foot, you know, doing that there. I looked up, I say, hey, look, that man shoot me. Yeah. And I went to her house. But Miss Belger was living there. And I saw a young woman by the name of Gerald. I said, Gerald, look, a man shoot me.
Not a good story. She was shot. Meanwhile, the revolution is continuing across the island. How is it being quelled?
St. George, Buckley, those plantations in the St. George's Valley, they were also looted. And in St. Andrew, people testified that they lost their cows as well. So cows were also taken during this 1937 event. So here we see rioters, therefore, on the rampage. They're attacking plantations, they're attacking planters, and they are keeping the police busy. The police is here in Bridgetown, making sure that order is kept, but yet they have to go to various parts of the island. St. Andrew, St. George, St. Philip, Christchurch. And they are assisted by a volunteer force. Remember that the British troops moved out of Barbados in 1905. And there's a volunteer force created, and that volunteer force is employed or deployed in the 1937 event.
I have done a little table somewhere which shows fairly clearly that in all 11 parishes, between, say, the 20th of July and the 3rd of August, you could find at least one incident that the police reported. And all of that will tell you that there weren't people just copying, although some of that might have gone on, but in a way, people were reacting to a situation. The Dean Commission put it this way, that there was an abundance of combustible material around, and it was the Payne incident, meaning the deportation of Payne, which caused everything to be ignited. I don't think it's a far-fetched way of putting it, but of course, I mean, the reason why everything started to blow up was not really because of pain, but because of the conditions that we've been talking about.
May we continue to celebrate the heroic actions of those brave men and women who in their own little ways started a revolution that ignited change throughout Barbados. Thanks for your time. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Here's a special invitation for you to join us next week at the same time. This has been...
Today is a funny night.